Disintegration of the empire. Objectives. After reading this unit, you should be able to explain to what extent Ashok's successors are held responsible for the disintegration of the empire, how various other political factors are viewed as contributing to the weakening of the empire, how Ashok's policies in general are considered responsible for the decline of the empire, the economic problems that the Mauryan empire believed to have faced, and the emergence of local polities in both North and South India following the decline of the Mauryan rule. Introduction. Mauryan rule was the first experiment in imperial government in India. Chandragupta Maurya, Bindusar, and Ashok were successful in establishing the imperial authority of the Mauryas over a large number of janpadas or kingdoms, and they were able to introduce a new concept in the governance of a large territory. However, the imperial authority of the Mauryas began to weaken with the death of Ashok in 232 BC and finally collapsed in 180 BC. What brought the disintegration of the Mauryan Empire is a very complicated question, and it cannot be explained by any single factor. There are more than one factors which led to the disintegration of the Mauryan Empire. In this unit, we have first discussed the responsibility of Ashok's successors for the disintegration of the empire. Then we have dealt with Ashok's policies, economic problems of the Mauryan state, and the collapse of the administration of the Mauryas. Finally, the growth of the local polities has also been taken into consideration in explaining the process of disintegration of the Mauryan Empire. Successors of Ashok. It is generally believed that Ashok died in 232 BC. However, the Mauryan rulers continued to rule for about half a century after his death. Several literary texts like the Puranas, the Advanas, and the Jain accounts give different details of Ashok's successors. The apparent confusion in all these accounts may be due to the fact that there have been describing conditions of a divided empire. It is suggested that after death of Ashok, the empire was divided among the surviving sons. Some of the names of Ashok's successors that we find in different texts are Kunal, Dashrath, Samprati, Salishushk, Devavarman, Satadhanavan, and Brihadrath. However, it is difficult to ascertain their exact period, but it appears that after Ashoka, the empire got fragmented and that there was quick succession of rulers. The quick succession of rulers weakened the imperial control over administration. The early three kings, Chandragupta, Bindusar, and Ashok, had organized the administration in such a way that it needed strict supervision. The quick succession of kings made this difficult, as none of the rulers could actually settle down and be in the control of things. Linked to this is the fact that dynastic empires depend much on the ability of its rulers, but the successors of Ashok failed in this respect. Each one of them ruled only for a short period of time and therefore could not formulate either new policies of governance or maintain the old ones. Despite the fact that full details for individual kings and their reigns are difficult to get, we get the picture of post-Ashokan Mauryan India as one in which the lasting stability of even political control was impossible to achieve. One can generally say that these successors politically weakened the empire and therefore lost administrative, economic, and military control of it. The partition of the empire is in itself enough to show that the process of disintegration had begun immediately after the death of Ashok. Other political factors for disintegration. The disorder that emerged in the administrative machinery after the death of Ashok is regarded as one of the important factors for the disintegration of the Mauryan Empire. The immediate problem for Ashok's successor was whether to continue his policy of Dhamma and its predominance in the government. This had truly been an unconventional way of governance and not a very easy way of comprehending the functioning of government. Ashok had been successful because he had the unique vision of understanding the complex social problems of society, and also he had accepted the importance of the principle of Dhamma in all its dimensions. It is not clear whether, despite Ashok's personal exhortations, his successors attached the same kind of importance to Dhamma as he himself had done. Another related feature of the political importance of Dhamma was the existence of a large body of officials of the state called Dhamma Mahamattas. It has been suggested by some historians that they had become very powerful and oppressive during the latter half of Ashok's reign. Ashok himself, in the first separate edict to the Mahamattas stationed at Dholi and Jogad asked them to ensure against oppression against and to be just and humane. Though there is no doubt that Ashok was in firm control of the administration, this cannot be said of the later kings. It was not simply the question of the direct contact with the Dhamma Mahamattas to ensure that they did not misuse their powers, but that of controlling the whole of the Mauryan bureaucracy that was at stake. The nature of the Mauryan state necessitated a king of strong abilities. It was a system which required the king to be in direct touch with all aspects of the state's functionaries, since these functionaries were ultimately held together by a power structure with the king at its center. Once the king became weak, the whole administration naturally weakened. Once the center became weak, the provinces too started breaking away. The officials of the state were personally selected by the king and owed loyalty only to him. Once weak rulers came and ruled for a short duration of time, it resulted in an overwhelming number of new officials constantly emerging and owing only personal loyalty to their respective kings and not to the state. This norm of personal loyalty had the danger of the officials either forcefully supporting the new king or opposing him. The later Mauryan kings were probably constantly faced with this situation. In fact, it were local rulers and princes that found it easy to emerge with these traditional ties to support them as important centers of power. The provincial governments under the later Mauryas thus increasingly began to question the center's authority. Though one cannot accept the notion that there were popular uprisings wrecking Mauryan state control, one can strongly suggest that the social basis of the Mauryan bureaucracy was under stress and strain, resulting in an inefficient administration unable to maintain social order in general. Whereas, under the first three Mauryas, the extremely complex system of spies employed for filtering in information on erring officials had worked efficiently, under the later Mauryas it collapsed. There was thus no means through which the kings could either gauge the public opinion in the empire or check on the corruption which had inevitably set in once weak rulers were in power at the center. A conscious loosening of military control on behalf of the Mauryan king has also been suggested by some scholars as a major political reason for their decline. Since this is largely attributed to a conscious decision taken by Ashok on this matter, we shall discuss it below in the next section. At this stage, we need to emphatically state that the decline of the Magadhan Empire cannot satisfactorily be explained by merely stating that there were weak successors or that there was military inactivity or that there were popular uprisings. Each of these was in fact fundamentally linked to the particular nature of the Mauryan imperial bureaucratic setup, and once this started cracking up, the whole political structure was at stake. Ashok and his policies. Many scholars have opined that either Ashok's political decisions or the effects of these decisions were responsible for the disintegration of the Mauryan Empire. Their arguments generally focus on the drawbacks of Ashok's religious policy. These arguments have two strands. First, there are those scholars who maintained that Pushyamitra Sangha, who killed the last Mauryan emperor, represented a strong Brahminical reaction against the pro-Buddhist policy of Ashok and the pro-Jain policy of some of his successors. Moreover, the Satavahanas, who rose to power in the Deccan after the Mauryas, were also said to have been Brahmins. These scholars list a series of acts done by Ashok himself, which may have antagonized the Brahmins. For example, the ban on animal sacrifices is considered one which was especially resented, since this action was taken by a Shudra king. According to Purana accounts, the Mauryas are listed as Sudras. They suggest that the Dhamma Mahamattas, as special officers of Dhamma appointed by Ashok, destroyed the prestige of the Brahmins. These officials disallowed Brahmins to continue their traditional laws of punishment and other Smriti injunctions. However, there are no direct evidences to support the above arguments. These are broad inferences which can be equally questioned. For example, the Sokan inscriptions clearly say that the Dhamma Mahamattas were to respect the Brahmins and the Shramans alike. It is, however, possible that in the later years these officials may have become unpopular among the people. This can be deduced on the basis of stories in the Buddhist sources. As officials meant for the establishment of Dhamma, they undoubtedly had special powers and sanctions of the king and were therefore feared by the people as a whole. Once they began to wield greater control it prevented Ashok's direct contact with the people. But this does not mean that these officials were specifically antagonistic to the Brahmins. Thus, to argue that the interests of the Brahmins were harmed by Ashok's policy and that Pushyamitra, a Brahmin generally engineered a revolt, cannot be accepted for the simple reason that if Ashok's policies were so harmful, this should have happened immediately after his death. In fact, Pushyamitra Sangha's actions should at best be understood as a palace cobriate made at an opportune time, having assessed the weak nature of the king's power rather than looking for any deliberate anti-Brahmin policy of either Ashok or his successors. According to another group of scholars, emphasis should be given to Ashok's pacifist policies as a factor for modern decline. They think that this was responsible for undermining the strength of the empire. This explanation focuses on Ashok's policy of ahimsa or non-violence. The harmful impact of this policy is provinces who had become oppressive and ought to have been controlled. Citing examples from Buddhist stories in the Divyavadan, this argument goes on to could not withstand the Greek invasions. Non-violence on the part of the king also meant that he no longer exerted his control over officials, particularly in the provinces who had become oppressive and ought to have been controlled. Citing examples from Buddhist stories in the Divyavadan, this argument goes on to show that revolts in the provinces had been taking place. The above image of Ashok is far from correct. Just as the theory of anti-Brahminical activity under Ashok's reign has been discounted as a factor for modern decline, so also the impression of an over-pacifist Ashok, lacking in vigor and determination to rule, has to be discarded. It is true that Ashok believed in non-violence as vital to Dhamma. There was, however, no extreme stand on this issue. A dislike for killing of animals for food and sacrifice did not in fact terminate the policy of the palace to continue killing animals for food, though on a reduced scale. Also, in governance and criminal justice, death penalty should have been done away with, but this was not so. Further, we have no evidence of the army having been demobilized, nor even a hint in the inscriptions to such a policy being intended. The evidence one has is that of only one campaign conducted against Kalinga, which had ended in the ruthless defeat of the latter. Had Ashok been such a pacifist, he should have reinstated Kalinga as an independent kingdom, but as a practical ruler, he maintained the supremacy of Magध over it. There are innumerable other indications of Ashok's assertion of his control over the different people of his empire, particularly his warning to the tribes. He had made it very clear that the misconduct of the tribes living within his empire, would be tolerated up to a point only and not beyond that. All these steps were taken by Ashok to see that the empire was kept secure. Thus, to conclude, the policy of Dhamma in no way weakened the army and administrative machinery of the modern empire. Pushyamitra Sangha was, after all, a general of the modern army, and even half a century after Ashok, he is said to have prevented the Greeks from entering Madhya Desh. According to Romla Thapar, even an entire generation of pacifism cannot weaken an empire and lead to its disintegration. Battles and territorial acquisition are not alone responsible for the creation and destruction of empires. The causes must be sought in other directions as well. Economic problems. D.D. Kosambi stressed on the economic problems that the Mauryas faced. These contributed substantially to the decline of the modern empire. His arguments center around two themes indicating that there were financial constraints on the modern economy, that the state took excessive measures to increase the taxes on a variety of things, and that the punch-marked coins of this period show evidence of debasement of the currency. The latter argument is based on his statistical analysis of the punch-marked coins of the period. Some of Kosambi's views, which have now generally been accepted as crucial factors in bringing about major changes in the Magadhan Empire and thereby its ultimate decline, are briefly as follows. It is suggested that gradually the state monopoly of metals was being lost. The demands on iron, so crucial for the expanding agrarian economy, could no longer be met by Magध alone. In fact, there were attempts to locate and develop new sources of it in the Deccan. Though such pockets of iron ore were found in Andhra and Karnataka, the Magಧ state found it a costly operation to tap these pockets. Of the many problems they faced in this connection was also the protection of the mining areas from intrusion by the local chiefs. The other point which is stressed is that expansion in cultivation, extensive use of forest wood, and deforestation in general may have led to floods and famines. There is in fact evidence of a big famine in North Bengal in the Mauryan period. Thus, many factors may have combined to bring down drastically the amount of the state revenue. In years of famine, the state was expected to provide relief on a substantial scale. In a centralized administrative system, the problem of not having enough revenues created many other acute difficulties. To enhance the revenues, the Arthashastra suggested that taxes should be imposed even on actors, prostitutes, and so on. The tendency to tax everything that could be taxed emerged out of the necessity of the treasury needing more funds or the currency having become debased due to inflation. The Arthashastra measures to be adopted in times of emergency are interpreted in this light. Further, the decreasing silver content of the punch-marked coins attributed to the later Mauryan rulers indicate that debasement had actually taken place to meet the needs of a depleted treasury. The burden of expenditure had also increased. This can be seen in the large amounts of money spent under Ashok for public works. Also, his tours and those of his officials meant using up the surplus wherever it was available. The earliest stringent measure of the state's control on its finances had thus begun to change even during Ashok's reign. Romila Thapar had further commented on these issues. According to her, the debasement of coins need not necessarily have meant a pressure on the general economy. In fact, it is difficult to say precisely when and where the debasement of coinage took place. In positive terms, she argues that for many parts of the Indian subcontinent, the general picture of the economy on the basis of material evidence in fact indicates an improvement. This is particularly seen in the use of better quality materials, which indicates a technical advance. There may have been debasement of coinage, but in her opinion, it was not because of a decline in material standards, but rather because of extreme political confusion, particularly in the Ganges Valley. This must have led to hoarding of money by merchant classes and debasement of coinage. However, she concludes, there is no doubt of the economic prosperity that prevailed with the political decline of the Mauryan Empire. Growth of local polities. If the material and technical advance of the country was not hampered by the political decline of the Mauryas, it can then be said that the material basis of many of the local polities kingdoms was strong enough for them to emerge with renewed strength in the post-Mauryan period. The Mauryas, in fact, had directly governed only the major and vital areas of the empire, the center of which was Magध. It is most probable that its governors, officials administering the core areas were selected from amongst the local peoples. These officials were often very powerful and acted as a check on the viceroy or a representative of the kings. As mentioned earlier, the political loyalty of these officials was crucial for the imperial structure to continue. A change of king meant a realignment of these loyalties. If this happened often, as it did in the post-Ashokan period, fundamental weaknesses would begin to inevitably creep in and prove the system unsuccessful. The half dozen kings that had succeeded Ashoka had made no basic change in the policy of governance adopted for the first three Mauryas. It has also been suggested that some of these kings probably ruled more or less concurrently over several parts of the empire. This indicates a segmentation of the empire even under the Mauryas. Major kingdoms. The disintegration of the Mauryan Empire was followed by the rise of a number of kingdoms in different parts of India. Immediately after the Mauryas, Pushyamitra established the Sangha dynasty, and the Sanghas were able to control only a part of the erstwhile Mauryan Empire. The Sangha family had held the viceroyship at Ujjain in western Malwa, or the neighboring regions of Vidisha in the eastern Malwa under the Mauryas. The Sanghas tried to revive Vedic practices and sacrifices, which may have perhaps been necessary to face the new invaders, namely the Greeks, and to establish their strength after their first king has usurped the throne. The Sanghas were followed by the short-lived rule of the Kanvas. The Greeks, however, in due course of time, became exceedingly successful in most parts of the northwest India. Their rule could only be terminated by the Sakas, who had settled along the Indus. The Parthian or the Pahlavas also made inroads in the northwestern India, but the most successful foreign intrusion were made from the first half of the 1st century AD with the establishment of the Kushan Empire. In the Ganga Valley, Rajasthan, eastern India and Deccan, many ruling families came to power. It is clear that under the Mauryas, the maximum settlement of villages had been in the Ganges Valley. The hills and plains of Assam and Bengal still remained to be opened up. Similarly, the south and southeast of India had contact with the Magadhan Empire, but a large scale agrarian economy had yet to come up in these regions. After the decline of Mauryan rule, many local rulers started ruling in regions like Vidarbha, eastern Deccan, Karnataka, and western Maharashtra. Gradually, the family of the Satavahanas built up an empire in the Deccan by bringing together many local centers. At about the same time, when the early Satavahanas were establishing themselves, Kharvel of Kalinga emerged as a powerful king in the Mahanadi region. In an inscription written during his reign and found at the Hathigumpa cave of Udayagiri hill near Bhubaneswar, Kharvel claims that he was the third ruler of the Mahameghavan family of Kalinga. That this family was a branch of the ancient Chedi family. He is said to have raided a major part of the country, including Magध and the Satvana and the Pandya countries. He was an ardent follower of Jainism. In the extreme south, the three important chiefdoms that continue to be prominent from the Maurya period were the Cheras, who controlled the Malabar area, the Cholas, who held sway on the southeastern coast, and the Kaveri Valley, and the Pandyas, whose power center lay around the tip of the peninsula. The Sangam texts of this period give us a considerable amount of information on the society, ecology, polity, and economy of the region these three kingdoms ruled. The above outline briefly discusses the geographical areas and the political completion of the major foreign and indigenous kingdoms which became powerful for varied periods of time in the immediately post-Mauryan period. Local kingdoms. Numerous local or sub-regional powers also grew in this period, either under the stimulus of the advancing agrarian economy or in some regions under the stimulus of trade. Various Indian literary sources like the Puranas mention of such tribal names as Nag, Gardbhila and Abhira during this period. They were being ruled by their kings. These 4 Nag kings, 7 Gardbhila kings, 13 Pushyamitras, 10 Abhira kings of the post-Mauryan period are listed. The Gardbhilas probably emerged from the large Bhila tribe, the Bhils of the forest of the central and the western India. Some of the Abhiras are known to have developed into Ahir caste, some of them famous as pastoralists. Along with these, we have other tribes who underwent change during this period and are known through the coins they minted in their own names or with names of their Janpadas. The Yodhyas were famous even in the time of Paini as professional warriors, and during this period were said to have been suppressed by Rudradaman, the Sak king. Their territory is said to have comprised the land between Satluj and Yamuna. Similarly, to the southeast of Mathura, the Arjunaya had established their autonomy towards the end of the Sangha rule. In the Punjab, occupying the land between the Ravi and the Byas, we have mentioned of the Adambaras. The Kunindas are said to have become prominent between the Byas and the Yamuna around the foothills of the Shivalik hills. Other tribal republics, as they are popularly known for this period, are those of Sibis, Malwas, Trigars, and so on. These Janpads interspersed the region of northern and northwestern India, and at the same time, independent principalities like Ayodhya, Kausambi, Mathura, and Ahichatra also reasserted their power, having earlier succumbed to the Mauryas. For the Deccan, we have some information mainly derived from coins of many minor local rulers and ruling families over whom the Satavahanas were able to establish their supremacy. For example, the families of Maharathis, Kuras, and Anardas are known from Maharashtra, Karnataka, and Andhra. Besides, many local chiefs of the Deccan who issued coins emerged during this period. For the extreme south, we know that the chiefs of the three main chiefdoms, Chera, Chola, and Pandyas, were constantly at war with the minor chiefs of the less developed regions. The Velir chieftains, for instance, were famous as they controlled important outlets to the Roman trade on the southeast coast. Though attempts were made in the post-modern period by various dynasties to build empires, there were several instances of each of them contending the other. Further, sub-regional powers could not totally be suppressed, whereas on the one hand, the political decline of the Mauryas created a situation for many of these local powers to arise. On the other hand, the economic expansion witnessed in the modern period continued unabated. The crisis in the Magadhan Empire under the Mauryas was thus one of the organization and control of its resources and not a lack of them. Let us sum up. In this unit, we have analyzed the various factors for the disintegration of the Mauryan Empire and the rise of local polities in its wake. The successor of Ashok failed to maintain the integrity of the empire which they inherited from Ashok. The partition of the empire after Ashok and quick succession of rulers no doubt weakened the basis of the empire. But more important is the fact that the inherent contradictions in the modern imperial setup accentuated the crisis. The highly centralized bureaucracy, with its loyalty to the king and not to the state, made the administration completely individual based. And the change of king meant the change of officials, and this had a very adverse effect on administration of Ashok after Ashok. We have seen that how some of the views of the earlier scholars that hold Ashok and his policies responsible for the decline of the Mauryas are not acceptable in the light of the contemporary evidence. The attempt by some scholars to explain the disintegration of the Mauryan Empire in terms of economic problems has also been taken into consideration. Finally, we have also highlighted the growth of local polities both in the north and the south, which accelerated the process of disintegration in the Mauryan Empire. ब्यूरोक्रेसी का पता है क्या होता है? ब्यूरोक्रेसी होती है सिस्टम ऑफ गवर्नमेंट बाय ऑफिशियल्स रिस्पॉन्सिबल टू एन अथॉरिटी. कोऑपरेट क्या होता है? अ वायलेंट और अनकॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल चेंज इन गवर्नमेंट. एरिंग का मतलब होता है दोज स्टेइंग अवे फ्रॉम द राइट पाथ. एक्सप्लॉयटेशन होता है एन एक्ट ऑफ यूजिंग फॉर सेल्फिश पर्पसेस एट द एक्सपेंस ऑफ अदर्स. लोकल क्या होता है? ठीक है पता है. पैसिफिस्ट होता है अपोज टू वार और वन हु बिलीव्स ऑल वॉर इज रॉन्ग. पॉलिटीज फॉर्म्स ऑफ पॉलिटिकल ऑर्गेनाइजेशन, सम कुड बी मोनार्कियल और रिपब्लिकन और ट्राइबल. Regional. Regional is characterized in a particular way referring to a tract of country or an area or district.